You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm Eric.
And I'm Miles.
And welcome back to our special series on Daredevil Born Again. We are covering this series as it releases, and we're discussing its themes, providing some quick rounds of reject, receive, and redeem. And this is big. For this special series, there is no spoiler-free section. So we're just jumping straight into this. So Miles, we're on episode 4. What happened in this episode?
All right, episode 4. I think the title is Latin. Sic Semper Systema. We'll see it. I got to read it down below. But largely, this episode is a reaction to the previous episode with the death of Hector Ayala, the White Tiger,
which apparently I was wrong. I had questioned that it was actually him, and so no, it actually opened.
The coroner confirmed,
though he is dead. I was like, oh, well, I was already wrong. Well, in week to week, so yeah.
The mask looked a little bit off, yeah. But so what we have here is that once it's really revealed that it is Hector, Matt, along with the audience, is growing increasingly frustrated with the system. So you see Matt is investigating the death of Hector, which is actually pretty cool because he's using his Daredevil abilities in different ways. And I've always liked that when the show is showing his excellent hearing or smell. And then also he is taking on a pro bono case as a defense attorney for a man named Leroy, who has a really long rap sheet. But the way he's brought into this is really Leroy and Matt are both really frustrated with the system that they're in, with the city. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Fisk, as mayor, is also frustrated with the system. He's trying to do this big development project down at the docks. We don't know whether it's good or bad, probably bad. And he's also dealing with, which has got to be frustrating, sessions with Vanessa and the counselor, Dr. Glenn, who is also Matt's girlfriend. Those guys don't all know this yet. And so part of the fun is, frustratingly, Fisk has to go through all of these city meetings, painfully slow meetings.
We built this city. We built this city
on rock and roll. I actually saw something this week. It said that the first time they recorded it, the kids were too good. Yeah. And they had to dub over it with kids who are kind of off key and
they had to find some more kids. Yeah, I shared that in the Patreon group.
Oh, that's so. Yeah, one thing that's really neat about it is that it shows you the discipline of Fisk. Mm-hmm. That you know that he's got this incredible rage that will make him do terrible things if he has the freedom to do it. But he's got some plot in his head that we're not exactly sure of that's making him endure it and stand up and going, yes, such talent. Such talent.
Oh, we have one more. No. I have to go.
City never sleeps, you know. It's fun. And then, but what he has this big plan to maybe improve the city. But there's public backlash because his sycophantic assistant Daniel Blake gets drunk and talks to BB, which is Ben Urich's, was it niece or daughter? I can't remember. Niece. And she plasters the story all around the city. And so he's dealing with frustrations. Meanwhile, Matt is investigating Hector's murder, figures out where the bullet casing went, and on the bullet casing, he can feel it's a Punisher logo. And so Matt tracks down Frank Castle, and they have a pretty great conversation where they're challenging each other like they always do. And the end of the season comes with, you can tell that these men are losing their patience so much because Matt is up on a roof practicing sweet Daredevil moves, and you see 4 or 5 different Daredevil cowls. Meanwhile, Fisk sits down at this nice fancy dinner. He seems to be enjoying himself. And in the corner is a man in a cage. Adam, the man who he said, I just had a conversation with, no ill intent.
Yes. Yeah.
He's got Adam in a cage.
I think we found out why his fists are bloody now.
Yes.
So
We were wondering.
Yeah, we were wondering. Yeah, the mystery solved. Yeah.
And then it ends with this mysterious hooded figure with kind of like the bleeding eyes. I'm sure James Harleman actually knows who he is, but I didn't read the comics enough. And he's doing a creepy thing in the hallway. It looks like taking the blood out of somebody or something.
Yeah,
which is
it looked
ominous.
like there were a couple people that were strung up. So I think he's draining people's blood. So I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out. Not being huge comic book nerds, some of the stuff we get to live life somewhat spoiler free. We just
Yeah. And so with that, okay, we've got the plot summary. What are your popcorn thoughts on this one, Eric?
Alrighty. So it's still bordering fresh. It's not quite as good as episode 3, but I'm not saying it's bad. It's just I'm still invested, but not too much is going on right now. It's definitely a slow burn right now. Hopefully the pace does start to pick back up. Next week they're dropping 2 episodes. So 5 and
nice.
6.
Yes, that's a little more like it.
They're going to drop 5 and 6. So something's going to happen in 6. And then potentially we do not. I didn't check this before we hit record, so I could be proven wrong. We don't know when technically 7, 8, and 9 are coming out. So it's projected that there's going to be the following weeks. But it could actually be longer than that. It could be a little bit longer than that after 5 and 6 before you're listening to us talk about Daredevil again. But some of the things I like, the best scene is definitely Frank Castle and Matt talking. Matt breaking down over, basically being confronted. Castle is actually confronting Matt on the feelings that he actually hasn't dealt with. He's just been pushing them down. And the other best part is because I kind of like the bad side of Fisk. Like he's that fleshness in me that I relate to so much, is when you find out that Fisk hasn't just forgiven Vanessa or forgiven the man that she had an affair with, that he's holding him in the cage. Is like, okay, I can definitely relate to that. I can also relate to Fisk's frustration with being a politician. when the right way has so many roadblocks, it's what causes people realistically to vote for a Fisk, because they see the city could be improved if we did XYZ. Oh, well, you have to do a committee. All right, let's do a committee. Well, you actually have to do such and such before you can get a committee, and then you have to do such and such before you can even get to that. And he's like, well, let's start there.
The next conversation after him was somebody talking about the criminal underworld. Well, actually, what you need to do is these shady things. Yeah, like there's that's another layer of the bureaucracy, is the crime in this city. Yeah, and you're like, and so this one of the themes of this episode is just the system.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's one of the things where it's like it gets so frustrating that people will just elect someone who doesn't care about the right way. They just want to get things done. They don't care what gets broken along the way. They don't care who gets hurt. They just want to see things get done. But one of the complaints about this episode is I'm actually not one of those people out there. People go, oh, Hollywood's out of ideas. Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't. I actually don't think that. I actually don't think they're out of good ideas or good stories to tell. I just think they've lost the ability to actually land the plane with the stories themselves. They just don't know how to tell a good overall compelling story from point A to point B. They lose the plot somewhere, somewhere in between. Case in point, this show, I think episode 1 and episode 2 were really, really good. Episode 3 was like, okay. And then episode 4 is still a little bit further down the quality. Still invested in it. But we'll see where it goes from here. Hopefully a lot of the reshoots they were doing, apparently the whole Matt and Castle scene, not only was that a reshoot, it was actually originally supposed to come later on in the season, and they recut it to make it come closer into the season. So I think they're trying to work with some stuff. They just have, unfortunately, they have a lot of footage that they have to use, and they're trying to tell a story. Some of it is going to be disjointed, but I am here. Obviously, I'm here for the long haul. This is much better than Rings of Power, and I was here for Rings of Power. So
Yeah. So I'd say, I would say it's not stale. It's definitely not buttered and salted, so it's fresh. And it's less fresh than episode 3. And even in episode 3, I was like saying, okay, well, there's no Daredevil in it. But I find for Popcorn Theology perspective, it's thematically interesting. It actually tells pretty coherent stories about a couple themes, which we'll get to. And then I just found myself wishing that they'd released at least a half season, because this is the type of thing, it made me want to keep watching, but I'm a little frustrated I got to wait a week for it. Maybe that's impatience, but I just wish they'd release half a season or the whole season all at once. I'd have cranked through this. And it's not because I'm trying to be too selfish. Is I want this show to succeed. I want them to keep doing Daredevil seasons, long after this one. But for me, I like the character, so I'm going to watch. I just wonder about somebody, if you were barely interested, if you watch this one, whether you would stay.
Yeah.
But it does have some interesting moments. Like I'm really enjoying Matt's interaction with Officer Powell. It's like a continual reminder that Matt can still kick some butt. Yeah. So, here's one question. There's some show and don't tell in this where Matt confronts Officer Powell. Like, what do you think? Was Officer Powell telling the truth about not knowing what was going on with Hector?
I think so, and I think that's why. And I could have misread the whole scene, but I think that's why Matt seemed to be surprised.
Yeah.
About that, the heartbeat didn't change and all that. And I think that's one of the things that made him. I believe that was before, right? That was before he went and saw Castle.
Yeah,
I think that's one. I think that's one of the things that made him go, all right, I need to go actually start investigating this.
Yeah.
Because he confronted the person he most likely thought it would have been, and he didn't get the result he thought he was going to.
Yeah, it actually made Powell seem a little more respectable in his dialogue, even though these guys still don't like each other. And I love just how awesome the line is where, Powell's like, well, maybe some of my more trigger-happy, aggressive cops would. And Matt just says, well, you'd have to bring a lot more than the last time we met, wouldn't you? That's awesome.
I know. I love it. All right. So as we move into our theology more side, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to give this a carbonated rating because I think there are things to talk about, especially around the idea of forgiveness, the proper understanding of what the justice system is actually supposed to be doing.
Yep, I agree. It's carbonated. We'll have a couple of themes: forgiveness, guilt, shame, and then frustration at life under the sun. Which, like last week, we got a lot of fruit out of just talking about the title, and I was like, I went straight there with this one. And so the title of this episode is Sic Semper Systema, which is it translates in Latin to "thus always to the system," which apparently. This is just Google search. It's close to the famous phrase that translates "thus always to the tyrants." It's like "Sic Semper Tyrannus."
Yay, Virginia! That's Virginia's state motto is "Sic Semper Tyrannus." Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, it's our state flag. It's on our state flag, and it has Lady Justice or Liberty, I forget which one.
Yeah,
with a sword standing on top of a tyrant.
That's pretty. That's pretty cool.
It's pretty BA.
Well, and the idea is that tyrants are going to get overthrown. And so, very fun piece of history. John Wilkes Booth said this after shooting Abe Lincoln and stabbing a general. I think he said it right before he jumped down on stage. And this is the same line that Brutus said at the assassination of Julius Caesar. And so, there's this idea that when the system is broken, it will be overthrown. I think that's what's going on here, which if you look at that title, then look at what the main characters are dealing with. You have frustration with the system or the city. So Matt in particular is dealing with frustration. He's got these clients. Last episode, it was Hector, who he got out of jail. And then, like as his niece says, then what good did that do? He's now dead. And the niece says, I hate them. I hate the city. No one's going to do anything about it because he's just a guy from the neighborhood and they are cops. And then the next part that Matt goes through is he's defending this guy who is going to jail for stealing caramel corn. It's Lamar, right?
Yeah.
And that guy's frustrated because he's just been in the system, going over and over and over through the system. And this reminds me of, I was looking up, just searched frustration at injustice. And there's one, Proverbs 13:23 says, "The fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice." So this guy's frustrated, like, I would be doing better, but I get caught up in the system again, and these people are going to pay more money to throw me in jail than they would to feed me through food stamps or whatever. And so, that's a pretty interesting theology point there. And then the third thing that Matt is shown frustration with the system is that when he confronts Matt Castle, that's funny. When he confronts Frank Castle, talking about Bullseye, Matt is trying to comfort himself and justify himself to Frank as like, I ran him down and I let the system take care of the rest. And Frank just sees through. He says, well, what about Foggy? What about Foggy? It's like, this is not working. Foggy should be alive. Bullseye should be dead. And at one point in this episode, Matt says, you ever feel like you're pushing a rock up a hill? That's Sisyphus in Greek mythology. It also sounds very much like Ecclesiastes, right? Ecclesiastes opens up with vanity of vanities, or meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And in reading Ecclesiastes, this was my Bible reading last night to prepare for this. Ecclesiastes 4 says this, in 4 verse 1, it says, again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. Like, I think that could be a theme verse for this episode. So that you see oppression, you see that your work is frustrated, and there was no one to comfort them. Or is there? Is there a devilish gargoyle-like figure who's going to rise up out of the crumbles of the city like the intro?
Will be born again. Maybe?
Will be born again underneath the crumbling facade of this city.
Yeah, but in the same vein of the frustration is you also have, and I already touched on this a little bit, is Fisk. He's frustrated with that system. He's frustrated with the entire thing of constantly being told that's not how it's done. That's not how it's done. And it's just like, come on. I want to make the city better. I'm trying to be legit. I'm trying to be legit. I'm trying to do things this way. People elected me to get things done. And this bureaucracy is just, the system needs to be overthrown. So you have it on both sides. You have the oppressed who are being crushed by the system and ground out by the system. It's just this frustration. But then you even have the powerful who still get in this system, and you have you have middle managers standing in the way of the agenda of the mayor of the city, and it's just like it creates so much frustration. And for those that listen to this in 10 years from now, just look at what's going on in the federal government of 2025 and these writers did not know what was going to happen, but it is kind of very interesting.
It's pretty prophetic, honestly.
Some of the stuff that Fisk is dealing with is some of the stuff that our current president of the United States is dealing with,
wanting to move fast and all this stuff,
wanting to move fast, wanting to break things. People elected me to do XYZ, and the system just keeps pushing back. And because that's the other part of ever feel like you're pushing a rock up a hill and everyone else is pushing the opposite way. So it's a different take on Sisyphus, where Sisyphus, he's cursed to push it all the way to the top and then it falls down. Push it all the way to the top and it falls down. Matt's a little different, where it's not only are you not able to push it up the hill and it fall down, it's like, no, there's people actively trying to push it back against you. And I think that's realistically what Fisk is coming into.
And they're describing life under the sun.
Yep.
Right. And what if there was, in the language of Cinemagogue and James Harleman, what if there was hope for life transcendent, somebody to lift us out of life from under the sun? And that's the fun part of Popcorn Theology.
Yeah.
So while you and I were frustrated at the kind of slow pace of this episode, when we start talking about its themes, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it is pretty fun. So we'll move into our rejects.
Oh, yeah.
And my big reject, and it can be a nuanced discussion. I will say that it can be a nuanced discussion. Is I just usually always take it the other other side
Yeah.
of stuff is the conversation with the criminal. Is the criminal is he's blaming the system the entire time. It's the system's fault. It's not his.
Yeah.
What's missing about this, what's missing in that conversation is that the system didn't make him steal. The system didn't make him commit any of the crimes that that has a long rap sheet on. At the end of the day, a lot of these situations, it's realistically, it's his own envy that caused him to sin. He saw people they had
Having
more
dessert,
than he did.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, they had more than he did. And he was like, no, at the end of the day, no one deserves dessert. Right? It's the thing, like, it's a great thing to have. It's a great thing to have. I want everyone to be able to have dessert, but no one deserves dessert, especially when that dessert comes at the literal expense of other people.
And there's always this justification, like, you know, what's it cost? It's just a couple bags of caramel corn for me. You know, you go, well, if everybody acted like you, there would be no stores.
Yeah.
That's the practical aspect here.
Again, to bring it into modern day, there's a reason why there's a lot of stores being closed down in California, because people had that attitude of, hey, it's only XYZ. We're not stealing from the local bodega. We're stealing from the multi-million-dollar or even billion-dollar corporation. That's who we're stealing from. It's all insured. Well, then they leave the town.
Yeah,
they
don't care about us,
and then they blame the system again, and so it creates a non-virtuous cycle.
Yeah,
and so it's one of the things is like this section. It wasn't entrapment. Like, what was happening with this guy? It wasn't entrapment. It wasn't injustice. The man was a thief, and he was blaming the system for getting caught.
Yeah, and he was saying, last time I was in the jail, I missed this appointment for, food stamps. And he's like, I'm not trying to live off them, but it makes it really hard. And I was thinking, he's sitting right across from a lawyer who could do that kind of thing for him, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, that's a way to solve the problem.
And this thing is like, as a lender, I have to take lending courses and stuff like that all the time, and I have to learn about disparate impact and redlining, that sort of stuff. And so, can a system cause disparate impact? Absolutely. Like an example is a bank says, "Hey, we don't do loans under 100,000." That's going to, by default, disparately impact. We're not doing it overtly. We're not picking a particular class of people or whatever, but by setting a minimum loan amount, you are by default creating some disparate impact. But again, this section, that disparate impact doesn't make you willfully commit a crime to try to gain it. And so it's one of those things where I pulled up Galatians 5, and it's talking about the freedom that Christians have, the new freedom, and it's a long section. I want to do a quick, but the one part that says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law." And it's this things where it's like Romans 13 also talks about, doesn't bear the sword in vain. If you do good, he'll reward you. Talking about the civil magistrate. Yeah. And so it is. If you're being thrown in jail because you're doing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, then you're living in an unjust system, and the system is destroying you. Yeah. But if you're committing any crime, at the end of the day, even someone like myself, I have used to have a very lead foot, and it'd be one of those things I would blame the system a lot of times because I was
Stupid
young.
Cop pulled me over.
Yeah, I was young and broke, and people, I would get pulled over, and then I'd be, oh my gosh, it's $300. I don't have $300, and so I'd blame the system. But at the end of the day, I was like, no one made me drive that fast.
Yeah.
No one made me do it.
You weren't ill-informed.
And so the thing is, like, I understand how the system can grab you and you feel like you can't get ahead. Yeah. But is it actually happening because of disparate impacts, or are you actually committing crimes along the way? And the reason why this is a reject and not a redeem is because in the show, this guy is clearly a criminal, and the show is trying to make you sympathize with the guy. And you can sympathize with him. As Proverbs 6:30-31 says, it says, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry. But if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold. He will give all the goods of his house. So it's this thing where it's like, hey, if you're stealing because you're hungry, okay, cool, yeah. But also if you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar, we also get it, right?
Yeah. This reminds me of a verse that we brought up a couple times on the podcast is in Leviticus 19, verse 15. This is how you should establish justice in the land. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. That's why justice is blind. Wink, wink. Yeah. I mean, that's part of that. That's part of what this whole show is about, is blind justice. And it is really bad when people put their thumbs on the scales of justice one way or the other. And so, I was a little uncomfortable with that. A kind of reject is, I was like, I'm not sure I'm so comfortable with the way Matt is arguing on behalf of his client about, it's like this deterrence is an outmoded form of justice. And then the prosecutor's like, no, it actually works. But I was like, what about the fact that he just kind of deserves to be punished for stealing? And they're like, oh no, well that's silly. That's a silly perspective. But God does affirm there's a certain amount of justice that you deserve. And so I just kind of reject. There's a thread that runs through those conversations that I think is counter-biblical. But there's plenty of things for us to receive or redeem.
Yep.
And so, I think the main theme that runs through this episode is forgiveness. So I put this under receive because you can receive the wisdom of forgiveness that is brought by Matt's girlfriend, Dr. Glenn. She says this about forgiveness when counseling Fisk and Vanessa. She says, without forgiveness, there can be no healing. It's not just the highest act of love. It's the only way forward.
Yes. I agree. That's one of my notes that I jotted down. I was like, that's a good quote. It's the only way forward. Like, we could quibble about the highest act of love.
Yeah. Well, that's probably laying down your life for your friends.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like the thing you can't quibble about though is in a relationship that's trying to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
It is the only way forward.
Yeah. And so Fisk even quotes it as he's acting out the opposite. I've been told that forgiveness is the highest form of love. And the guy's in the cage. It's like, that's an excellent way that Fisk, like in the first season, he has that epic speech about, I realized I'm the malcontent and the Good Samaritan. Yeah. This is another one. It's, I've been told this is the highest form of love, but that's not me. And he even talks about his father wound, where he's like, my dad, he didn't practice any forgiveness. I learned how to manipulate and to push people. And all this just reminds me of one of the scariest verses in the New Testament for me. Comes right after the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus says, for if you forgive others their trespasses, your Father in heaven will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. It's, forgiveness is a gift of God received by faith. But if you do not become a forgiver in response, you were not saved. That's how strong this is. And it's like, that feels weird coming from me, right? Because I'm often unconditional love offered to you in Christ. But here's a condition. If you are somebody who holds on to unforgiveness after you've been confronted with the Lord that you ought to forgive somebody, you are in real trouble. Forgiveness is a huge part of the Christian faith. And I just like that that's a major theme of this episode. And then you see, in response to this, the episode plays with this theme with each of the main characters. So for Fisk, like we said, won't forgive Adam for the adultery with Vanessa. He's punishing him.
Mm-hmm.
And then in his speech with Vanessa, he's like, I am trying. I'm sorry, it's fun to imitate him. He's saying, my dad wasn't a forgiver, but I'm trying with you. And so his idol, Vanessa, the only thing that really makes him act counter to his character ever, he's trying to forgive her, but he's really not doing a good job. But he's got a reason to try to. Very interesting thing. And then what's also interesting is both of our favorite vigilantes in the show, Matt and Frank, they won't forgive themselves. Now, a lot of times in like secular life, they always say, you got to forgive yourself. And I cringe at that a little bit, but it really is something that happens in the Christian life. It's like, you really need to, forgiveness is basically, it comes from a Greek word that means release. And what happens is that people will hold on to the justice that they need to inflict on themselves, and they won't release it. So they will continue to punish themselves, which is actually a pretty offensive thing from God's perspective.
Yeah.
Because if he, being perfect and holy and just, can let go of his case against you, and you are saying, no, I'm more just than God. It's pretty...
Yeah.
That's a pretty bold statement.
That's probably why it says, neither will your father forgive your trespasses.
Yeah, it's offensive to him.
It's like, oh, you're more forgiving than me? Oh, okay. I see how it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Matt has been kind of living with this shell, same way as Fisk pretending that, he didn't put Adam in a cage. Matt has been kind of putting himself in a cage. And Frank, he goes, yeah, you see that guilt, you see that shame, like, that's where I live. You're guilty, Red. That guilt, that shame, that's my home. I can see it on you. I can smell it on you. And then Frank has the same thing. He says, every time I stop moving, I hear the voice of my little boy saying, get him, Daddy. Because both of them are struggling with the guilt that they did not do enough. They didn't save their friends. They didn't save their family. And Frank is saying, you're here. You want permission. And so when Matt says, I ran him down, I let the system take care of him, Frank sees through it and he says, what about Foggy? That conversation springboards into Matt at the end of the episode starting to re-embrace Daredevil. And so one thing I would kind of reject about this is the show is not portraying this in a positive light, I don't think. Is that honestly, Daredevil is going back into being Matt is going back into being Daredevil, not because it's the right thing to do, not for love of neighbor, but out of guilt and shame. That's what I think this episode is communicating. And so, whereas Hector Ayala, he was killed by this system because he did it because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Love your neighbor, I think, would be implied in there. Matt and Frank are doing this out of guilt and shame. Super interesting storytelling, but I think that it's something we should wrestle with as Christians. And
I agree. There is the whole thing of two people do the same action.
Yeah.
One did it for the right reasons because it was the right thing to do. Their conscience is clean. And the other one did it out of their own guilt and shame and manipulation. And we as a society, we know there's a difference.
Yeah.
We know there's a difference. That's why people don't trust, in some cases, they don't trust when millionaires and billionaires donate a lot of money to charity because you're allowed to have tax write-offs.
Yeah.
And so people go, oh, they just did it for a tax write-off. It's like, well...
Or to be seen by men is something that Jesus preaches against. Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. It doesn't mean total, absolute secrecy, but it's don't do these things to be seen by people. Like I'm going to preach this week on Mark chapter 7, where Jesus is challenging the Pharisees. And he says, it's not what goes into your body that defiles you. It's what comes out of your heart. And he had just gotten done. You do all of these man-made traditions, but forget the commands of God. And so it really is about your heart. And so I think it's interesting in this show that Matt seemed to be motivated by something that, as a Christian, I'm excited that somebody's going to do something for this city. But the psychological story that they're telling is that Matt is doing this out of guilt and shame, not out of love for the neighbor, love for their city, love for Hector's niece. I mean, maybe that's mixed in there, but we'll just see what that ends up being. All this reminds me of one of my favorite Bible verses about grief, of being exposed in your sin. In 2 Corinthians 7, Paul says, for godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. And so you'll start to see, is he going to use grief to repent and change his ways and grow, or is it going to produce death? And it's a very fun thing for them to play with in this show, but I'm a little sad for Matt. Yeah,
no, exactly. It's like, I hope he was wearing a cross, so it's like his faith isn't gone completely, but I do hope that they, even though it's Catholic faith, I do hope they do start to lean in more to it, and actually that faith is what brings him back from the potentially going down the castle.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Route.
Do it, Matt.
It'd be great. It'd be great.
Cling to the light, Matt.
Yep. And so one of the next points that both of us actually had, but yeah, we were looking at is kind of a redeem a little bit. Is Fisk's assessment of the word affair.
Yeah.
And he calls it, and so the wife says, not the wife, the therapist says, we haven't talked about the affair. And he goes, what a ridiculous term. Not a dinner party, it was a betrayal.
Yeah.
And I was like, I love that. I was like, yes. Like, I funny enough, Jerry Seinfeld had an affair, but he had a stand-up routine about adultery.
Yeah.
Adultery is like something that adults do, and so it's such a fancy word for what it actually is, and it's this thing, affair.
Yeah,
Ridiculous term, not a dinner party. It was a betrayal, and I love that. The reason why this section is not a receive is because Vanessa then brings up her upbringing and how her father like disappeared or whatever. And so how with Fisk disappearing, it triggered her. It triggered something. And the show didn't address that your triggers are not an excuse for bad behavior. And so that's why it was like, if this was just Fisk quote, I'd be like, heck yeah, this is a full on,
What's it's funny.
This is not a redeem. This is a receive.
Yeah. He's right perspective.
Yeah. But Vanessa talking about her triggers.
Yeah.
One that triggered me. Her talking about
that
her triggers
me to
like,
judge you. Yeah.
I was like, that's weak terminology. But then using those triggers as an excuse for bad behavior for betrayal, because that betrayal is Fisk's understanding of the marriage covenant is actually got closer to God's understanding of the marriage covenant than the therapist, and definitely Vanessa's.
Yeah, like when the therapist asks, "Is this a dissolving of a marriage or a repairing a marriage?" You're like, "Well, from a Christian perspective, yeah, we're rooting for the repair of a marriage."
Yeah,
and I love the phrase you were talking about where she uses her trigger as an excuse. And in pastoral counseling, I've realized when we talk about forgiveness is that the word excuse really is a pretty dirty word. What you do when you excuse something is you basically say it wasn't really bad. But if you excuse something, you can't forgive it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we often do psychologically. We excuse some sin, but what is the real way forward is forgiveness. And so you need to actually confess things. The Bible calls this walking in the light, which actually reminds me. So one of my points is interesting is the really sycophantic character, Daniel Blake, who's just sucking up the Fisk all the time. In this perverse way, he actually practiced a Christian principle. Fisk is dressing down his whole crew, and Daniel confesses, it was me. I don't deserve. It's like the prodigal son. I'm not worthy to be called your son. And he's so contrite before Fisk, and Fisk forgives him. Now you're suspicious because it's Fisk, but Fisk, he sees that Daniel demonstrated loyalty and courage in confessing him. And so it's kind of this awesome picture of in an episode about forgiveness, Daniel Blake confesses his sins and receives a forgiveness and a bit of a restoration back to his relationship with Fisk. Although Fisk finishes it off with a murder threat, saying if you ever do something like this again, it'll be the last thing you do.
Yeah.
But it's very neat that almost every main character in this episode had some kind of relationship to the concept of forgiveness, and displayed an aspect of it that we can explore as popcorn theologians. And so while the episode was not that interesting, it was kind of a filler, it was thematically interesting. And so I was like not too excited about this episode until we started working together for what we were going to say on this episode. And now pretty interesting to me. That's one thing I love about popcorn theology. It turns bad movies into interesting movies for me.
Doesn't redeem the quality of the film, but it redeems the conversations.
Yeah, and it shows at least if you're like, oh, I didn't like this. There was actually a lot of thought in the fact that these were organic choices that moved each of these plots forward, but they all explored a concept of forgiveness and frustration with the city, and that's pretty interesting. That's worth taking a look at, and I can commend the writers for that. I just want to see somebody beaten with one of those Daredevil sticks pretty soon.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, well, the credits are about to roll on this episode, but before we go, the 10-year anniversary for Popcorn Theology is coming up. Technically, the 10-year anniversary is already has already passed the actual date, but we're doing a special recording on the 25th. So, this coming, I think this coming Monday is crazy, coming fast. So definitely send us your favorite popcorn theology moments. 10 years of Popcorn Theology, and we can't wait to bring 10 more years to you guys. But send us your thoughts, and until next time, keep engaging movies and media from a godly perspective. And remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
We built this city.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.